The biggest travesty of all time is a beardless dwarven woman, and as I, Renfail, the bearded dwarven princess, can attest, every dwarf should have a beard, including the females, and you cannot tell them apart. But that's not the gravest mistake that Amazon is making with their rings of power. Now they're crunching timelines to the point where they're throwing out Tolkien's existing genealogy for dwarves and making up their own version. Mind blown? Not really. We knew this was happening because they don't appear to have any respect for the source material. I digress. We're going to dive into that this morning. So I got to give a shout out to Jackson, also known on Discord as the Ithilien Ranger, for bringing this to my attention last night during the live stream, and sharing the link out because we're going to be diving into this today, going into how the Rings of Power is going to be breaking Lord of the Rings dwarvish lore. Now, I'm not a Tolkien expert. One of the things I'm doing right now is reading through, for the first time in 20 years, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion ahead of the Rings of Power. But one of the things that's very firmly established in Tolkien's works is the lore and the mythology and the genealogy, especially the genealogy of the characters. Now we've got elven genealogy, we have human genealogy, and we have dwarvish genealogy as well. And these lines are firmly established. It is ridiculous how they're willing to go to such lengths to condense everything into the timeline that they're trying to work with, which I still don't understand because they have 5 seasons. You could have easily done the 2,000, 3,000 year period of time for the Second Age, or a portion of that Second Age over those thousands of years throughout a 5 season run. But because they need to have a specific cast that's going to go out throughout these 4 or 5 seasons, they had to condense, which I get the condensement, but not this much. In any case, I digress. Shout out to Jackson again, Ithilien Ranger, for sharing this out to me. This is found over on CBR.com. They are talking about forget Dissa's missing beard. The Rings of Power will break Lord of the Rings existing and established dwarvish lore. Now, I didn't know what he was talking about at first glance, and then I read through this and I went, oh, and I've got some additional tabs up here, which we're going to be going through as we get deeper into this article. So if this is your first time here, welcome aboard. We're gonna ramble a bit. Anyway, uh, scrolling down here, I've joked about this again, tongue in cheek. I don't really give a shit that she doesn't have a beard. However, the Tolkien nerd inside of me very much says that's not right. It's not established lore. We should be following it, but I get it. You're making an adaptation. You want to put your own creative spin on things. I get that. I totally get that. And if in the scope of this show we see this as being the least of the changes that they're making to have their own creative spin on this, I would forgive that. But we've seen all of these other things that they're completely just inventing to the point where, yeah, it does rub me the wrong way now, and I am going to poke fun of it every single time. Dwarven women should have beards. That's all I have to say. It's established lore. Okay, chickens. It's early morning here, so we got roosters going on outside. So the bit that we're going to focus on this morning is the fact that the dwarvish women are supposed to have beards. This is not the only bit of Dwarvish lore that the Rings of Power is choosing to ignore. The series has revealed that both Durin 3 and Durin 4 will appear as father and son, which is a problem in and of itself because Durin 3 and 4 were not father and son. It's worse than a simple lineage mistake because including two Durins is an egregious error in Tolkien's established lore. So this is where we get into some really interesting stuff, which I'm using them as this was the jumping off point for me because I haven't gotten to the Silmarillion yet and I haven't read it in 20 plus years, so I'm a little vague on some of these facts. So they're talking about here how it goes back to the original dwarf fathers. The eldest was named Durin, and he ruled so long that became known as Durin the Deathless. The dwarves believed that each subsequent Durin was a reincarnation of the original forefather returning to rule over his people. So, according to lore, it would be impossible for two Durins to be alive at the same time, and it definitely wouldn't be possible for a father and son to both be Durin. So, either inclusion of two Durins was a gross oversight on established literal facts, or the series is choosing to ignore an essential part of Dwarvish lore for the purposes of condensed timelines. Now, here's the part where I'm not exactly sure on. Would it be impossible for two Durins to be alive at the same time? Could not a father be alive and have a young dwarven son that he has also named Durin? Or do they only take on the name Durin when they become king? That's the part I don't understand, because if it is part of established lore that each Durin is believed to be the reincarnation, then how does that exactly work if you have a living father and then he's the reincarnation and he's Durin and his son is born? How can he also be the reincarnation? How does that work? I have questions. I do have questions about this. Um, but in any case, going into we're over at TolkienGateway.net now. Durin 3 was the king of the Durin's folk who ruled the great dwarf city of Khazad-dûm at the time of Sauron's assault on Eregion. So that's definitely Second Age. It says during his reign, the 16th century of the Second Age, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm had stuck a rare friendship with the elves of Eregion. Around Second Age 1500, the elves, guided by Anatar, began forging the rings of power. According to the dwarves, Celebrimbor and the elven smiths gave Durin the first of the 7 rings of the dwarves. Other traditions state that Celebrimbor was said to have yielded all of the 7 to Sauron after torturing it. It was Sauron who gifted the ring to Durin. Sauron was actually, excuse me, Anatar was actually Sauron, who came to corrupt the elves, blah, 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 blah. By Second Age 1697, he could control neither the elves nor the dwarves. He led an army towards Eregion. In response, Durin sent a large force of dwarves to the aid of Celebrimbor, but with the fall of Eregion, his warriors were pushed back and the doors of Durin were shut. The actions were not in vain, for it was by the aid of Durin that Elrond was able to escape and establish the refuge of Imladris in the north. So that's Durin 3. Um, and it says he ruled until he was 107 years old, and he's noted because he was gifted the Ring of Durin. So it makes sense that Durin 3 is going to be an essential part of the Rings of Power show, because he is the first dwarf who gets the ring. Now, when we get into his son, Durin 4, there's actually not a little bit written. Excuse me, not a lot written. It says, like all Durins of Durin, he's given the name of the first of the 7 fathers George because he greatly resembled him in both appearance and manner. Blah, 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 blah. So it just shows his timeline, late Second Age, early Third Age, but it doesn't give a lot about him beyond that point. So it just mentions here he was, from the Lord of the Rings Online, he was the reigning king of the Longbeards during the War of the Last Alliance. He and Theuda, the Northmen of the Second Age, were tasked with defeating a mighty horde of Easterlings. They were defeated and retreated to rejoin the Lesser Alliance on the besieged plain of Gorgoroth. So, excuse me. Not a lot written about Durin 4. So, in the scope of what they're doing with the show, I suppose it could make sense that they are going to include Durin 4 in the same timeline as Durin 3 if Durin 4 is a babe. But because of where he falls in the actual timeline, it's not until after the fall of Durin 3. So this is where I could see, and this is assuming, I'm making a big assumption here. Big assumption. I'm making the assumption that they, Rings of Power, Amazon, which they haven't done to date, if they were to follow this and make it kind of okay with the lore and make it work even within their condensed timeline, Durin 4 would be a babe or a child or a very young dwarf. Durin 3 would be there during this attack from Sauron, which again wouldn't happen until towards the end of the Rings of Power show in my mind, if this is about the assault by Sauron. Because in the beginning of the show, we're not going to be, I'm assuming we're not going to be see Sauron in Sauron's form. We're going to be seeing him as the elvish, handsome gentleman that he appears to be, and under the guise with which he seduces everyone to believe that he is this innocent person who's just trying to help everyone. So, it could be that Durin 4 is just going to be a very young dwarf. And if that's the case, I could be okay with that. What I'm not going to be okay with is if they make them both be like adults, and we haven't seen how this is going to work. And again, I don't know enough about the established lore of, can there be two Durins at the same time, or do they only take up the Durin after the other Durin has died? Like, I don't know enough about dwarvish lore. I know it's a sad shame, and I'm trying to re-educate myself with the readings of the Mondays in Middle Earth, which go live every Monday on 11 a.m. Central Time if you want to join Renfell, the Bearded Dwarven Princess. So, I don't know. I'm looking to educate myself more, continuing to read. I'm going to go educate myself more on the subject and hopefully know more about it by the end of the day. Until next time, happy reading, everybody.